is on Fox News, Glenn Beck, Joe Rogan, NPR. He has even spoken at Oxford Union and at the UEN Parliament. He has spoken at National Eagle Forum, and now the pinnacle of his career at Utah Eagle Forum. So, James, you were, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but he could talk an entire hour about this or longer, but he was a math professor, and then he became what he is now. So tell us as shortly and briefly as you can the fun story of how you went from being a math professor to being a political guru.
I don't know if I'm a guru. I don't want to be that. But, okay, so the story does unfold across a decade. So it's not like, oh, this happened and then here I am. I was a math professor at the University of Tennessee, and I was getting frustrated with the fact that the requirements to continue to teach mathematics at the freshman level, what are called service courses, the ones they make you take if math is not your major or engineering is not your major, they were telling us that basically everybody had to pass. It was minimize the number of students that you fail, don't demoralize kids, bump their grades, give them extra credit, do whatever you have to do to keep them in. And I didn't really want to participate in an education system that I thought wasn't dedicated to educating, but was rather dedicated to passing people through and giving them a credential. So I decided to leave academia in 2010, and I have not taught since 2010, and it turns out to be very difficult to do mathematics on the side. It's a hard subject. So I left, and in a rather drastic career change, I became a massage therapist, which left me a little bit academically bored. And I started to get involved in these discussion forums in the philosophy of science and other kinds of academic fields that aren't quite as difficult as math. Sorry if you're a philosopher, it's just not as hard. And it's just not. And so I was involved in these discussion forums, and more or less they get attacked by feminism. And everybody was getting accused of being a sexist and so on, and it didn't make any sense. And so, unlike most of the people that I was peers with at the time, I was starting to write with some of these people. You know, I had an article in Scientific American and a few other places, Time magazine, before I realized it's a World Economic Forum magazine. But at any rate, I was writing and I was working with several people, and I did a different trait, which is that I wanted to understand what these feminists were talking about. So I started asking them questions, and not the kinds of questions that you might think, but rather, will you show me the materials where this stuff that you're talking about is defined? So they sent me articles, and I started to read them, and this led to reading academic articles and feminist theory and gender studies. And I thought, holy cow, what is going on over there? And I started kind of tracking the academic literature from maybe 2013 through 15. And a friend of mine that I was writing with, his name's Peter Boghossian, and I decided that these people are definitely ripe for an academic hoax. They need to be fooled into thinking that something absolutely absurd is legitimate scholarship, and we'll see if they publish it. And so we wrote one as a trial balloon in 2017 in May, and it was accepted by a very low-level journal. And this created a lot of controversy, and because there were children in the room, I will refrain from naming the title of the paper, because this is academia, so of course you can guess that it's a little bit perverse. But at any rate, this was controversial. They said if you really wanted to prove your point, you need to do a lot more papers, they need to be in higher level journals, blah, blah, blah. So Peter and I said, let's do that. And we wrote 20 more over the course of 2017 through 18, over about 15 months, together with a woman, Helen Pluckrose, that I wrote Cynical Theories with. And the three of us wrote these papers, and we ended up getting 7 of our papers accepted. 7 more were under peer review still, on the way to being accepted, when the Wall Street Journal figured us out, tattled on us, and the jig was up, and we were no longer allowed to continue hoaxing them. I can't really tell you too much about those papers. Suffice it to say that they were not academically adequate. They could easily lead to my tenure and ascension to the highest ranks of leadership at Harvard. But I didn't plagiarize except for one book. We did actually get a paper accepted in a social work journal, a feminist social work journal, that was a direct plagiarism of chapter 12 of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. And Peter got brought up on charges by his university for this little stunt we pulled, and one of the charges was that he plagiarized, because they were going to take that very seriously. And so they charged him. They said, how do you plead to the charge of having plagiarized Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, and he said, I plead guilty, and the guy replied immediately, we withdraw the charge. Because it's so humiliating, I guess, to have published Hitler as social work. This put us kind of on the map as people who understood what was going on with woke literature as we were coming to understand it. I was reading a ton of it to be able to do that, and I realized somewhere in the middle, around New Year's 2018, that civilization unravels if this stuff is treated as academic scholarship. And I went, and perhaps the boldest move of my life, and I went to my wife and I said, I want to quit my job and dedicate all my time to studying and exposing this because I have a head start. To which she replied, because we're old school, my wife is a woman, she replied, can you make money doing that? And I said, I don't know. And she very, very generously, and to the maybe good fortune of the nation, said, you have 18 months to figure that out. And then this little stunt's over. But it turns out we got the plane off the ground. By the way, 18 months meant 15 months. I'm not kidding. She really is a woman. And so that led to me having to speak about this issue a ton, studying the issue a ton. And all I've done professionally since is either read about it, write about it, podcast about it, or travel and speak about it. So I read the Marxist literature, I read the woke literature, I connect the dots between them. I can give a comprehensive explanation about how everything that's happening in the world is an updated version of communism, from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations through the CCP, all the way down to the gender bending in the schools. It's all communism, if you need a short answer for what it is. But that's how we got here, is I decided to make fun of some feminists.
And you gotta love his wife that would give him 18 months to find out if he was gonna make money on it. So pretty impressive. So you're in Utah, as you know, because sometimes you travel a lot, you forget where you are.
That's true.
So in Utah, we think that we are a red state. We think that we're very Republican, and we have most of our, 75% of our Senate and our House are led by Republicans. But you are here to tell us what I already know, and many of you do. We're not that red. So tell us how we're not red, why we're not red.
Yeah, I bring you the bad news that you probably are already aware of, that this is the fakest red state in the country. You even beat Georgia for the fakest red state in the country. And you do have a lot of people in your offices that have ours by their name, which is not quite the same thing as saying that they're philosophically Republican. And that's a big problem. I don't know if you know that the office of the governor in this state 3 or 4 years ago announced explicitly that they intended to become the cradle of the fourth industrial revolution. That's in black and white from the office of the governor in 2019, so we can figure out whether it was Governor he, him, or somebody else that did that. I'm not super up on Utah politics, I confess. There are 49 other states that are also on fire that I have to attend to sometimes. But the fact of the matter is that the fourth industrial revolution is one of the many names for the gigantic transformation of our entire civilization and way of life that nobody should want to be a part of. And Utah has taken it upon itself to be the national leader in that program, which could only possibly be happening if it were an extremely fake conservative state, which is, by the way, if I were a subversive communist and I wanted to try to pull off a gigantic heist, I wouldn't put it in a blatantly liberal or progressive state. I would put it in a red state where nobody's looking. And Utah seems to have fit the bill for a wide variety of reasons. Some of those are going to be your natural resources. Some of those are physical infrastructure. Some of those are data infrastructure. You're the physical and data crossroads of North America. There are a lot of reasons why. The LDS Church has a gigantic reach globally, so it's a very useful apparatus to spread global agendas if they wanted to try to infiltrate with that. So Utah becomes a very fruitful area to try to target. If you don't know what the fourth industrial revolution is, you should hear this, though. This idea comes from Klaus Schwab, who's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he said, in short, the first industrial revolution was the machine revolution, the second industrial revolution was the electrical revolution, the third industrial revolution was the computer or digital revolution, and what he says those three industrial revolutions have in common is that they changed our working environment. What the fourth industrial revolution is where we move into actually not just the digital, but we actually go into the digital space ourselves. It's the internet revolution. And he says the difference is that this revolution doesn't change our environment, it changes us. So the goal is to, as Karl Marx might have had it, remake man into the new sustainable and inclusive man who has the right values, who's connected through his devices, through the things that he's implanted or carries or wears on his body, to the internet at all times. It is to generally create a global hive mind. And this is what the World Economic Forum, in conjunction with the United Nations and their subsidiary, the World Health Organization, are all really pointing toward. And for whatever reason, your glorious state with its lovely new flag has decided that it is going to be the vanguard of that project in the United States of America, which means Utah's in big trouble. And believe you me, I've gone around for about a year trying to tell people we need to pay attention to what's happening in Utah. We need Envision Utah, for example. We need to pay attention to what's happening in Utah. I get laughed at. Nobody believes that good conservative Mormon Utah could possibly be doing anything nefarious or globalist. But it turns out that a whole lot of the architecture for the whole program is centered here, started here, was built out here. And so Utah's got some struggles ahead of it. And I know that this is sort of a Mormon thing, so it's kind of fun to say. The fate of the nation sort of depends on what happens with Utah in fulfillment of certain prophecies that were made some time ago about the role that Utah would play in the decisive moment of history that we are now entering into. So I'm hoping to help Utah figure these challenges out. But currently, it's making a lot of moves that are very consistent with, we'll just say, the United Nations in general, which is why I'm glad to hear what Senator Mike Lee is up to, pushing to get us out of that. Did you say?
I don't know. I can't hear him. So no pressure, but it's on you, babe. Yeah, keep that in mind. So we're just going to segue right into one of the most important topics, in my opinion, that we are dealing with right now. Some people call them PPPs, public-private partnerships. We have been talking about public-private partnerships for 15 years as Eagle Forum, and it has been very difficult, virtually impossible, to really be heard or listened to. Then we get this amazing treasurer, Marlo Oakes, and you are right on top of this, and I want you, you know, public-private partnerships sound really good on the surface. You're going to take the private sector, is going to help pay for the government. It's going to be awesome. It's going to save us lots of money. Tell us the truth about public-private partnerships.
I mean, the simple truth of it, and we could save some time here, is that the old name for public-private partnerships was fascism. What a public-private partnership is in that specific regard is that the state operates as kind of a centralized core corporation, and this is actually Benito Mussolini's model. I've been reading Mussolini for the last month or two in detail for really the first time. And so the state becomes the central corporate entity, and then the corporations within the states, the actual corporations, operate through a subsidiary model. So they're like, if you understand shell corporations, or you understand the idea of, you know, Frito-Lay owns like 25 brands, and each one is technically its own corporation, but it's owned in subsidiary fashion to a larger corporation. It works like that, but the biggest corporation on the pile is the state. And in fact, what's happening here is that primary amount of collusion is happening between the state and not necessarily companies like energy companies or whatever else, but what we're seeing is that they're colluding with the financial sector, and they're colluding with the pharma sector, and they're colluding with the tech sector to censor, to contour information. We heard about mismal and disinformation earlier, which means telling the truth. And this is why the Southern Poverty Law Center has a profile on me, by the way. Which is a funny thing to, it's seeing as it's January 6th, by the way, one of the things they note about me is that I made fun of George Floyd on January 6th last year. That's in my profile. Can you imagine the shame? Can you imagine the shame? I'm definitely going to change my ways. You guys go and pray for justice for George Floyd, which means closing the border, obviously, to keep the fentanyl out. And then the ghost of George Floyd will bring you good Democratic presents like broken windmill blades and things. It's just how it works. But the point is, the public-private partnership, the best way that I've heard it explained is actually the way Vivek Ramaswamy explains it, which is to say that which they cannot accomplish through the front door of the government, they're going to accomplish through the back door of the corporations. Tech companies can censor what happens on their platforms. The government can't censor, but what we've seen through the Twitter files is that the government was leaning on the these companies to censor people in specific ways, which does violate the First Amendment, and there are these lawsuits now pending about that. But the idea of the public sector and the private sector getting in bed together and creating one sector, the public-private with a hyphen sector, is really a dangerous concept because, again, anywhere that you normally would be able to go petition the government for redress of your grievances as outlined in the First Amendment, all of a sudden you're going to run into a corporate wall or a proprietary, like with the schools. You go, I want to see what you're teaching my kids. Say, well, unfortunately we're using a lot of proprietary supplementary curriculum and that's protected by copyright law, so we can't show you what we're teaching your kids. And what they can do is they can use kind of the best of both worlds from the perspective of power to leverage over citizens to take away all of our freedoms and to work together so that I guess the goal really is that you will own nothing and you will be happy. The government will create the circumstances where the businesses that control people thrive the best, and the businesses in turn will lobby to make sure that the government and its representatives, many with R's by their names, do the things that are in the corporation's best interests to become monopolistic oligarchy as opposed to a competitive market environment.
Okay, well that leads us, we are going to talk about the flag in a minute. But first, before we do that, I want to talk about education. Because we all care about education. It's a huge issue. And we find in education there's a lot of really nice sounding words like diversity, inclusiveness, equity. But we find those words have dual meanings. Talk to us about DEI.
Yeah, so the first thing that you have to understand, you probably have got to at least, you may be much more advanced in this, but you have probably got at least to the point in you're dealing with woke stuff to where when you read it, you feel like you want to gag. Like you see the words and you know that something shady is going on with the words and you just, I can't read this stuff anymore. I'm sick of it. I don't even know what it means. And you probably get this weird feeling about this kind of copy-paste boilerplate that they always publish. Well, the thing you have to understand is that every woke term, so every specialist buzzword they have, conceals an agenda. The way that that's affected is that they have two meanings. The words have two meanings that are put into play. One that they expect normal people will think the word means, and one that is the activist meaning. And which one do they mean? You want to say, oh, well, they mean the activist. No, that's not correct. They mean both at the same time. They mean both according to whether or not they're being watched at that moment. If they're being scrutinized, all of a sudden, it's the plain sense of the word. Inclusion just means that we don't do anything that hurts people's feelings. We make sure that people aren't left out. It sounds very good, but in reality, what inclusion means when nobody's watching is that it means that we're going to include values and lessons that are outside of the pale of the existing society, what Gramsci called the cultural hegemony of the existing society. So we're going to include things that are outside of American values or Utah values or good principles or just the way things are in America. I'm trying to not use the word cultural hegemony again because that's the correct term. And what that really means is communists. What it really means is Marxists and other militant ideologies. Fascism is another militant ideology that's outside of the pale of the Constitution and American values for sure. And so it means including these kinds of values. So it means teaching your children to view whether it's social issues, whether it's environmental issues or whatever through that particular lens and creating an environment where that's fostered and nothing else is allowed. Diversity sounds like it's oh yeah, we want to attend, we don't want to leave people out just because they're not part of the majority. You hear a lot about ethnic or religious or sexual minorities. You hear a lot about historically underrepresented groups, so we want to fix the representation. You hear phrases like that. And so we want diversity to bring that in, but that's not what they actually mean. They want diverse to the set of usual values. So when they're being watched, it means, no, we're just trying to make sure that there's great representation and so nobody's left out. That's diversity and it's our strength. But then the second nobody's watching, what it actually means is, as Ibram Kendi phrased it, experts in diversity. In other words, people who have been awakened to a Marxist consciousness of what it means to be considered an other in your society. Equity is not actually as tricky as diversity and inclusion. Equity literally just has a definition they won't tell you, which is an administered system in which shares are adjusted to make citizens equal. In other words, socialism. It's just an update of the word so that you don't know that they're implementing socialism. And that's the value set that diversity and inclusion are actually trying to work toward. Equity is not an American value. So diverse means diverse to American values, and inclusion means including not American values, and specifically it's equity. And why is that not an American value? Well, you could appeal to Martin Luther King, where we're concerned about content of character, quality of merits, in judging somebody, or we could appeal back to what he was actually referring to, which is the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment contains an equal protection clause, which does not mean adjusting shares to force equality of outcome, because that requires discrimination, which intrinsically violates the equal protection clause. We don't have an equitable protection clause. And so equity actually is just a trick. It's just a straight trick. It doesn't have two secret meanings. You hear these other words like we want to have a place where everybody feels like they belong. We want to foster a sense of belonging in our schools or in our workplaces. What that actually means is that we want to have unity in the workplace under a set of contrived standards that favor the people that have been historically left out, or really communists. And so if you don't go along with it, how do we know it's communists and not, say, racial minorities? Well, look at Larry Elder. He's the black face of white supremacy, says the Los Angeles Times. Look at Dave Chappelle. He made his jokes about trans people allegedly from his, and I quote, position of white privilege. I don't know if you've seen Dave Chappelle ever or heard anything the man has ever said, but to accuse him of white privilege is a bit of a stretch. I think that's actually one of the jokes he used to make in his own show, as a matter of fact. So you can tell that what it actually means is ascribing to the same values. This is when Ayanna Pressley said, we don't want any more black faces who don't want to be black voices, and we don't want any more brown faces who don't want to be brown voices. When they wrote that Pete Buttigieg, who is gay, and also the son of the guy who translated the Marxist Antonio Gramsci into English at Notre Dame in 1970, Joseph Buttigieg, when they said that he doesn't speak with the gay voice, so he doesn't actually represent gay politics correctly, so he's not authentically gay, they're saying that if you don't actually agree with their politics, you're not diverse, you're not inclusive, and you're not actually fostering a sense of belonging. So it's literally, and this is maybe a different tangent, it's literally the formula that Mao Zedong used to transform the CCP and then China in the 1940s and 1950s. The formula is called unity, criticism, unity. We create a desire for unity. We all want a place where everybody feels like they belong. And then we criticize those elements that are preventing the unity from arising. You see, we would have had national unity if you would have just got your vaccine. But instead, we didn't get that because you dirty, unvaccinated people prevented us from having national unity so we could move forward. And you criticize those people and humiliate them through struggle. And then we can have, as Mao put it, a new unity on a new basis. We can all adopt sustainable and inclusive values, and it'll be kumbaya after that. And so that's actually the model of these words. But every single one of their terms, if you're reading anything they publish and you say that word looks like it's a buzzword, it has two meanings. I guarantee you it has two meanings. And it is absolutely necessary for the maximum number of people to be able to learn to stop and ask questions. Do not assume that that word like diversity that you think you must know, that you know what it means. You have to start digging deeper and say, what's that going to look like in practice? How's it going to be implemented? What does it mean to be an expert in diversity? What is this was big in Oklahoma. A lot of their paperwork said to appeal to diverse individuals. What is a diverse individual? What in the world does that mean? And so it's easy to read past that and say, well, I'm college educated. I won't ask that question. You've got to ask that question. Because they're using language in this double-headed way so that they can play the game of heads I win, tails you lose, whether they're being scrutinized or not. And they will advance the activist agenda on the back of those words, which we find in policy tucked in all over the place. Oh, it's a small concession. Just place it. We want to make sure that education is something that makes an inclusive environment for all students. Sounds good. Nope. That's one of those phrases that should make you a little queasy now. Inclusive for all students? Why are you having to specify that? Oh, because your underlying assumption is that some students actually don't have equality, and so we're going to jimmy the system to create an equitable outcome. In other words, adjust shares to make citizens equal. We're going to apply socialism to this system. And until you start to learn to see through this language, they're going to trick you every time. And then I know you guys are probably a pretty religious crowd, and the devil is characterized as a deceiver and an accuser And you need to think about, how does this work? Well, you think that I have a bad intent, you're a racist. Well, there's your accuser. And so I really do think that you need to be careful to look that these words, these phrases, carry hidden assumptions of hidden power dynamics, that the second you put them in and then stop looking, they will apply it in that way in order to change your institution from within. That's what Gramsci said was creating the counter-hegemony within the institution to make the Western society soft to socialist values and Marxism.
Very well said. Okay, so in Utah, we passed a bill a couple of years ago, or last year, it's kind of blurred, but anyway, Representative Ken Ivory was the sponsor of the bill to get pornography out of schools. It just does not even seem like we need to pass a law to get pornography out of our public schools, but we did need to, and we did get the law passed. And in response, Davis County School District, which I'm admitting that I'm actually Davis County, instead of taking the porno out, they took out the Bible. So we still don't have the pornography out of schools. If I took those same books, those same pages, and went and read them to my neighbor kid, I would be arrested, but they are in our schools. And I just want to give a quick plug to Utah Parents United, ratedbooks.org. You can go there and you can find the schools and the books, the libraries where these books are, so you can be proactive and know how to protect your families and other people's families, ratedbooks.org. So how do we get the porn out of the schools? How do we actually become more effective?
Okay, so let's just talk about the Bible thing first real quick.
Let's do.
And I don't actually want to talk about the issue of whether or not the Bible's in the schools. What I want to say is that their answer to trying to pull pornographic young adult literature out of schools was to say, well, if that's what you want, then we're going to also pull out the Bible. It means they're confessing that those books are part of a religious movement on their side. That's what they're telling you. And in fact, queer theory, which is what this is based in, is a cult religion. And that's not hard actually to prove in a variety of different ways. Queer theory is not an academic theory. It is, in fact, the doctrine of a cult religion, and they act like it's a religion, and they bring kids into the cult. They cut off from their families. They try to, if you want to know which cult it is, it's the very old Gnostic cult, so they hate their physical body, so they try to transform their physical body to be in line with their true spiritual nature, which they've been enlightened to by a guru or a teacher or something of that kind that's revealed to them their true nature of who they are. This is a religious movement. It requires you not just to reject the Bible and its claims, or to reject biology and its claims about sex and the realities of life and human physiology and everything else. It also requires you to adopt a particular view that there's a true human in his or herself that's inside that precedes the physical body that it happens to inhabit, which is therefore a soul, and that soul can be out of alignment with the body that it happened to land in, and that social strictures have then constrained it to act in certain ways. That's a lot of detail to just point out that I literally can write a book, and actually have written a book with another guy coming out soon, detailing that, in fact, queer theory is a religion. And when they decided to retaliate by saying, well, fine, we'll take the Bible out, they're confessing that this is a religion, and it is actually an Establishment Clause question as to whether or not it belongs in the schools in the first place. And the answer is no, it does not. The promotion of a cult religion is not something that our state schools should be doing in any state, period. And that's pretty important. Now, how can you be more effective? Now, this is a little bit challenging for your Mormon sensibilities for certain. The most effective thing in the world that you can do to fight back against the books in the schools is to get the books in the schools. Not into the schools. Go get them yourself. Get copies of the books. If you are a lady, you have a certain advantage, I've noticed, because I tend not to carry a bag, but ladies tend to carry a bag. And I was introduced to this by an activist in Kansas, a mother there, who got several of the books that were in the school library. She carries them with her in her bag, and when she goes to lunch or she goes to dinner or she meets with anybody, she pulls them out and says, have you seen this? And shows people a physical copy. Another thing that's been very effective, and you've probably seen a number of these things happening, and somebody's going to have to, it's not in line with your values to do this. Queer theory is designed specifically to be against your values even to read it. You need to get copies of the book. You need to show up to public fora where there are cameras and the whole thing, or on TV or on the news, and you need to read the objectionable material and get shut down for it, because it is in fact objectionable. The FCC will not allow you to push it or to read it. The school board, if you show up at a school board meeting and read one of these books aloud, will cut your microphone on the justification that children might be present. And what you need to do is catch them admitting this again and again and again to move the needle on the issue. So that requires, like Pastor John Amanchuku, to go around and read the books in public meetings, to read the sexual material out loud, to show pictures of it. If you put them on social media, they will close down your accounts, by the way. The only podcast I've had that was demonetized on YouTube was the one where I read out of one of these books. Queer theory is actually designed to be hard to expose because it's completely outside of the polite sensibilities of normal, healthy adults to share it, and it's not appropriate for children in any way. It turns out the only way to be effective is to show, don't tell. You can't tell people about the books. You have to show them the books, and you have to let them cut your microphone. You have to let them try to sue you for violating FCC regulations. And then in the legislature, you push if it's bad with the FCC, it can't be in schools law. It's actually pretty simple. If the FCC wouldn't allow it on the air, it can't be in our schools. You break up with the American Library Association like your kind of neighbor Montana did. Montana recently broke up with the American Library Association completely. Why? Because the American Library Association is a completely captured institution. Its current president, Emily Drabinski, is openly a declared queer Marxist who has openly throughout all of her professional writing, all the way back to her PhD thesis, talked about the agenda being to, and I quote, queer the catalog. In other words, to turn libraries into a vehicle for advancing opportunities to get children to say, what does that mean? What's happening here? Can men be women? Am I different? Am I somehow not like my parents say? And then to go find a trusted adult, meaning somebody at the school who they can talk about that with, and then hide that from the parents and put them into the affirmation pipeline, which is nothing short of catastrophic child abuse. The most egregious child abuse scandal probably in human history, as a matter of fact, at least in the Western world, and it's happening right under our noses. To be effective, you have to show, don't tell. You have to show what's in those books. You have to do it publicly, and you have to take whatever comes. They'll shut you down, they'll say it's obscene, and that's what you want. You want them admitting that it's obscene, and then you pass a FCC rule through the legislature saying if the FCC says it's not okay to be on the air, it definitely cannot be in schools. Crucially important issue. And let me just reiterate, by the way, the point of the books is to get the kids to wonder and start to ask the questions. In the academic literature of critical pedagogy, which is the fancy name for the brainwashing scam that they use in schools, the point is to create what they call generative themes, to present children with reasons to ask the question, to give spontaneous utterance that then the teacher can give an explanation to. Maybe the teacher isn't permitted to raise the issue of sexuality in the classroom by statute, but they can answer a spontaneous utterance. So if they can put something in front of the child that causes the child to say, I was reading a book in the library and it showed this, what's that mean? Now the teacher gets to talk about it. And so the activist has a workaround to the legislation through that pathway. And so the goal of these materials being present is to generate the opportunity for the child to ask the question, for the adult, who in frankest terms is acting as a groomer into this cult ideology, which is based on sex and sexuality, for that teacher then to be able to circumvent the law and have the conversation and lead them down that pathway of eventually affirmation, which will take place mostly through after-school clubs and meetings and things like that to kind of get around the fact that it can be banned out of the curriculum much more directly. So you have to understand the point of these materials is to get the kids to be curious enough about it, to ask about it, at which point they have free license to do to start the entire process. And that is the purpose of critical pedagogy, which ultimately we have to figure out a way. You can't just blanket ban something that vague, but we have to find a way to remove critical pedagogy from our school system entirely and to treat it as completely illegitimate and brainwashing and wholly inappropriate for children and inadequate to their education.
Thank you. So cancel culture is a really prevalent theme in all of your books and what you do. So how have you seen that evolve?
I think everybody was very well aware a couple of years ago about cancel culture. You were a lot more silent than you are now. I think people probably have actually started to perceive that there were things that 2 years ago you might have hesitated to say that you don't hesitate to say now, which means cancel culture has evolved to have lost a lot of its power. Cancel culture, by the way, we have to be very careful about what it means. It means that when you have done some moral transgression, not necessarily that you violated a company policy or a law, that they are then going to go leverage, say, your employer, your social environment, your church, your community, the people in your life, to try to shun you or fire you or remove you from your livelihood based on social pressure. It is not, as a matter of fact, taking accountability for, say, what you see at Harvard, rampant, flagrant serial plagiarism, and saying, well, we're going to hold you to account for that. It turns out accountability and canceling are not the same thing. Canceling is when they leverage social pressure to get you fired or shunned by your family. It's what the Marxists in China called a struggle session. Outside of having violated anything other than the moral sensibilities of the activists who are pushing the opportunity. But it's really lost its way. In fact, people are frankly sick of it. I've seen a lot of times where these kind of struggle sessions begin or the attempt of the cancellation begins and people just frankly say, no, we're not going to put up with this anymore. People are really tired of it. Living in fear for your job because of something trivial that you said in your private life or whatever that happens to come out. This is something that Americans, I think very broadly, but especially in even fake red states, but states that are coded as red, are just generally tired of. And so I've seen a lot of progress on that. I'm actually more concerned with a purity spiral on the right now than I am with the cancel culture on the left being particularly effective. I think they've primarily overplayed their hand by firing lots and lots of people over the vaccine, especially from the government. The thing in the military where they squeezed it out, that really freaked out Americans, and there's been a kind of a rethinking on a lot of this. The accusations of racism that always had a shelf life, and that shelf life is more or less past. We've actually got a good paradigm case. It's not racism, but it's actually allegedly transphobia with the representative from, was it one of the airlines, who recently went viral for standing up and not using the declared pronouns of a trans activist who's now throwing a gigantic fit. And this guy's a hero. He's not a hero universally. My Democrat dad probably doesn't agree that he's a hero, but generally speaking, his life is not in tremendous peril like it would have been 2.5 years ago over this transgression. And so we have evolved away from a strong cancel culture environment. The struggle session has lost a lot of its potency. And I think what we have to do is continue to do that. We have to continue to push. If, say, somebody here stands up for something that's good and right, and I'm not talking about does something flagrant or obviously a problem, and gets accused of doing a racism or whatever, they say, well, I don't want critical racism in the schools. Well, that must be because you're a racist. I think Claudine Gay should be removed from Harvard. Well, that's because racism against black women in academia. And you say no, and then this whole thing starts. It's got to become a norm for us to say, no, I know that guy, he's a good person. That's not true. And to start standing up with one another, because that's what shields you from cancel culture. Cancel culture works by isolating a target, making them be completely alone and defenseless, and having their professional and social life turn on them. So the opposite of that is that when you see somebody who's falsely accused, you rally to them. No, I know that guy. He's a great guy. I don't think that what he did was wrong at all. And we've got to start having this attitude of standing up for one another, using organizations like this. You should always have a principle in these organizations that we're going to stand with you immediately when you get attacked, and we can sort out the details later, because maybe it's an honest mistake, maybe nothing happened, maybe it was ginned up, but we're going to stand with you first rather than joining in on the pile-on and everything else. And if we do that, we're going to defeat cancel culture completely.
unfortunately, the time goes fast.
I talk long.
Yeah, I wanted to, that was just tying us right into the council culture. We have this historic flag, and as you know, we exchanged it for a new flag. And this is sweeping the nation. Tell us what you think. Do you think that replacing our flag is cancel culture, or is it just a way to market our state?
No, it's communism. It's communism. You need to learn to recognize communism. It's out with the old, in with the new. We're going to have what is a flag? A flag is the banner under which you recognize yourself as a entity, a political entity, a state, whatever it happens to be. And we're going to change those to something completely new and contrived now. We're going to throw out the history, and we're going to have a new banner, which means there's going to be a new unity under a new basis held up with a new flag. It's the exact same process that you saw in China, where the goal was to destroy the four olds, which is to destroy all vestiges of old culture and replace it with new revolutionary culture. And this isn't just Utah. You guys were the first, and you guys have actually gone the furthest with it, but it's happening in Pennsylvania. It's happening rather hilariously in Minnesota, where they literally just copied the Claudine Gay control paste the Somali flag, and they're going to go. They moved the star. Let's be fair. They moved the star, but otherwise it's just a Somali flag. But that tells you a lot about what's going on. Your flag is fairly neutral or whatever in terms of its content, but it's not neutral, politically speaking, in Minnesota. So you can actually get a look behind the curtain as to what the agenda is. The agenda is to destroy old culture and have a fresh, clean start with a new culture, with new values that people are going to rally around without being able to look far back into the past. And this is a standard tactic of communism that's happened in every single place that communism's ever been. They did this in China, actually, to get the red flag with the 5 stars. The flag before that under the nationalists had 5 stripes that represented the different peoples of China. And they played an entire critical race theory card in order to change the flag and change the entire culture. They claimed that all of the racial classes of peoples of China, the 55 minority races, were being turned into Han people. And they did the same thing, Han supremacy, good Hans versus, bad Hans. And the whole thing was that they're destroying your culture, and they fomented a minority revolt. And one of the things that they changed was the flag. And so you really got to think twice. The change of flag is to change, in a sense, the symbolism of the thing that you are, and to have a completely new set of symbols and a completely new thing. The flag itself, honestly, in a sense, if absent this context, it's a small thing, and it doesn't really matter if you like the new flag, if you like the old flag, it doesn't actually really matter. But it's not absent the bigger context of destroying history for a marching communist revolution across our country. So you have to say no to the small things, or you're going to also lose the big things.
Okay, well said. One more question. What is the source of the greatest hope that you see for America's future?
It's the American people. It's the American people. I get asked this question everywhere. I've now got to speak in 44 states. And state after state, red state, purple state, blue state, fake red state, doesn't matter. What I see are people awakening, the tone, the tenor changing. I hear people saying that they know. I heard it today more than once. This is the fight of our lives. This is the fight of our lives. I heard this, in fact, from the Speaker of the House. So that means somebody that's in a high office in this state. This is the fight of our lives. So people are starting to realize not just that there's a huge problem, which P.S. I was considered positively crazy 2.5 years ago giving these kinds of talks. I was having the people who invited me were getting hounded by the donors for bringing the crazy guy, for saying that the country was in deep peril. I was saying we could possibly lose our country over things like critical race theory making its way in, and I was insane. And now everybody understands that we are teetering on the brink, and we might actually be hanging by one arm off the cliff already. And that's a huge change. And I see people taking action. I heard great things in this room today. When I was in Tacoma, Washington, I heard the Republican Party for Pierce County there speak, and I heard brilliant strategies for starting to consolidate and regain political power. I went to Canada, which isn't exactly the most, non-communist place. I went there at the beginning of October, and they have an entire movement called Take Back Alberta that's sweeping tens of thousands of members, and they've taken over the entire Albertan government. It's incredible how effective they've been. This is a simple, replicable model, but what it is it's not the government, it's not any of those. It is the people saying enough is enough, and we are the sovereigns in this country. They aren't the sovereigns. We are the sovereigns. That's exactly what our Declaration of Independence and Constitution are about. And people are starting to wake up to it, get interested in it, and starting to speak up about it, and digging deeply into the causes of the problems that we have and exposing them. You know that they don't like to be exposed because the second they're exposed, they change the name so they can try to do it again. It's not diversity, equity, inclusion anymore. It's inclusive excellence. Yeah, that's going to trick everybody, guys. But that's also something we've caught on to. The name changes used to trick us, and now they don't trick us. So the American people are by far the greatest source of hope. I think that we are going to see, we're going to see some unbelievably bad things visited on us, I suspect, this year by the powers that be. And unlike when COVID broke out, we're going to immediately blame the powers that be. We're not going to say, oh no, a water crisis just happened. We're going to say they rigged it up and they're trying to control us, and no, I'm not putting a smart meter on my house, you jerks. We have changed, and we will win, and I'm completely hopeful.
You're awesome. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. James Lindsay.